Hello and welcome. I'm Gauhar Raza and you are watching Eureka, a program that brings you face to face with an outstanding scientist, Dr. Gangan Prathap. Welcome to Rajya Sabha channel.
Very nice to meet you.
I'm very thankful that you could take time to come here from Kerala, far off place to travel in the morning and be here. Let's go back to memory lanes. How do you remember your schooling in a foreign country, which was your country at that time? You were a citizen, a British citizen, in fact.
Yeah, let me begin by telling you that in the 50s, Singapore was still part of the British Empire. And when my parents did migrate to Singapore, they were all British subjects. It was just moving from one part of the empire.
And you were also born as British subject.
Yes, I was born as a British subject. And so my early days in school were very interesting because I had classmates from most of the regions in Southeast Asia. I had classmates who were Chinese, Malays, Indonesians, Filipinos, Arabs, Eurasians.
And Indians also?
And of course, about 10% of them were Indians. And even the Indians were from a large diaspora within India, mainly from Tamil Nadu, and a significant number from Andhra, Karnataka, Kerala, and Bengal, and a few from Punjab as well. And so the education was very good. It was in the English language. And now we see Singapore as having one of the best schooling systems in the world. So I must have been fortunate to have been exposed to that kind of schooling system. And the other important thing, which I value very much now, was that democratic liberal values were imbued in me right from the beginning. You get to understand the other person's point of view when you have so much of diversity, and you have to build unity out of that diversity. And I'm sure that has affected the way I think as a scientist also, and helped me in my career later on.
Yeah, I'll come to that how you have been able to work in many areas of science after getting trained in one particular area. But going back to your schooling, do you still remember, are you in touch with some of these schoolmates? You
Yes.
left very early.
Yes, that's something that technology has helped. As a result of Facebook now, I'm in touch with almost all my classmates.
All your classmates from school.
What's called secondary school. In fact, some of them are meeting a month from now to celebrate the 64th and 65th birthday. And I've told them to remember me because I can't make it to that meeting.
Must be a joy for all of you to get together.
Yes, I do meet them. Some of them do pass through various parts of India.
Most of the time, those people whom I have interviewed, I have asked this question: when you went abroad from India, was it a cultural shock? In your case, it will be reversed.
It was exactly the reverse.
Came back to India. Was it a cultural shock?
See, it does help in a way. Because when I came back to India, I started seeing India through the eyes of a stranger. And the last 50 years or so have been a slow adaptation. And every time I was a rebel, I kept asking myself, why can't India reinvent itself to be like, say, Singapore was at that time? In fact, Singapore has come a long way since then, from what it was in the 60s and so on.
In Asian tigers.
It was one of the fastest growing economies and so on. And so I've always asked myself, and even today I ask myself, why can't India be like Singapore or like Germany?
Why did you decide to go to IIT? And when did you decide? Was it in a school? Was it after coming back to India?
I was not aware of the IITs when I was in school in Singapore. When I came to India, I found that I have to do the pre-university again because the 10th standard exam from Singapore, which was the senior Cambridge O-levels, was not accepted for entry to higher education in India. So I had to do a year's program at Madras Christian College, called the pre-university in those days. And there I found that all my peers were trying to write the IIT entrance exam. And I thought I will also join them.
It was peer pressure.
It was peer pressure. And I had no idea. There were no coaching classes in those days. So I thought the best way to prepare for the IITs was to study from the American college level textbooks. I still remember those names. I still have those books in my library. I remember my son using them. Sears and Szymanski in physics, Bruce Mahan in chemistry,
Oh, wonderful.
Harry and Resnick, and so on. And I had probably over-prepared myself for the entrance exam. And so when the results came, my teachers were surprised, so was I. And I could have chosen any branch I wanted.
And you topped the national...
I topped the country. I was the first from South India to top the country. Because in those days, in the first 8 or 9 years of the exam, the toppers used to come from Bombay or Calcutta. So
you were the first one.
I
from
remember my teachers telling me that I was the first from the South Zone to top the entrance exam.
Was there celebration when you topped it?
At IIT Madras, the faculty was quite excited that somebody from South India...
No, at home and in neighborhood?
No, in fact, that's quite interesting. Most of my relatives have never heard of the IIT. In fact, some of them actually thought I was going to an ITI. Because things have changed now. Now you have this entrance coaching classes mushrooming all over the country. And so there wasn't not that much of a celebration.
Going for coaching during our days was considered to be extremely bad thing to do.
It was non-existent when I was a student. In fact, that's one of the bad signs.
So there were no celebrations, no hangama,
nothing,
no drum beating, nothing.
When the letter came saying that you have to come for counseling, I just took a train and went to Chennai.
Not with parents?
Not with my parents. I traveled on my own. I stayed in the hostel. And the chairman of the entrance exam came to meet me in the hostel. He wanted to see who it was who had become JE number 1. We were called JE number 1s in those days. And they were surprised that I chose aeronautics as the subject. But there was a reason for that. See, that period was one of the most exciting periods in human history. And that was when man landed on the moon. So as a young teenager, I was exposed to what was happening on the Apollo project. And one of my childhood heroes was that German engineer who then became a naturalized American called Wernher von Braun.
Right.
And if you can say that I had a role model, it was von Braun. That I wanted to be an aerospace engineer.
So your role model changed from C.V. Raman to Bond.
C.V. Raman is an interesting episode in my life. I had forgotten about C.V. Raman until I won the Bhatnagar Prize. And then my mother told me that when you were very young, you once told me that you wanted to be like C.V. Raman. And then I tried to find the background to that, what had happened in my life. And I remember a little booklet that my father had bought in Singapore. And in those days, we were all part of the Commonwealth. Singapore identified itself with countries like India and Pakistan and so on. And there was this small booklet which listed all the great men of the Commonwealth, the British Empire and the Commonwealth. And one of the names was Sir C.V. Raman. The other was, of course, Sir Rabindranath Tagore. And my father must have told me something about C.V. Raman. And that's probably when I told my mother, when I grow up, I want to be someone like C.V. Raman. And
so you wanted to be C.V. Raman. I have to take a break. We'll continue the discussion. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Eureka. We were discussing that you had a role model, which ultimately changed into another role model. But the science always ignites imagination of the younger generation and they look at the role models. Once you decided that you want to be aeronautical engineer, then it was very clear to you that this is the path that you are going to take, or was there wavering during IIT Madras days?
No, absolutely not. I did want to be an engineer, and that too an aerospace engineer. But I had not actually forgotten Sir C.V. Raman. I again remember something my father told me, and that was the stress on first principles, that you must go to the absolute fundamentals, which is what C.V. Raman actually did. And that has been the guiding force in my life. I've always asked myself, what is the first principle? What is the absolute truth? And that made me delve deep into the subject, whichever subject I took up.
Whatever interaction I've had with you at personal level, I find you a basic scientist, not an engineer. Is it true that you
Absolutely.
never could become a real engineer in that sense? You wanted to be scientist, you were scientist, and mathematics was your language.
Absolutely. What that happened was that each time I ask a question, that opens up a new range of questions. And then you probe deeper and deeper into it until you come to what is probably the core of reality. And that often means that you work at the level of paradigm shift and paradigm change. And that is what marked my early research career. And in fact, that's what led me to win the Bhatnagar Prize. So that was a period that I enjoyed,
The
but not
most.
for very long, because by 1992, many national missions were taken up in the country. And I was told that you don't have the luxury of doing only research, you must help in the national programs. And
Right.
so I was put on the aircraft project. We had several aircraft projects in India in those days. And I worked on some of them for about 8 years until the year 2000. And as you said, mathematics and beyond mathematics, computer science and computer modeling became the way in which mathematics was used in engineering. And that led me to this position at the CSIR Center for Mathematical Modeling and Computer Simulation. I became the head in the year 2000. And at that time, my scope of work spilled over from aeronautics, because you find that the same equations that govern aeronautics are used to predict the monsoon, are used to predict the seasons, to predict the tsunami.
This was a period when things were merging together.
Together. A
And
lot of
the,
interdisciplinary work was taking place.
yeah,
A lot of computer
the walls
models were
between different
made.
disciplines were crumbling down.
It's called a seamless integration of knowledge. And in fact, I used to tell my family at home that now I'm working on earth, wind, and fire, no longer aeroplanes and missiles and rockets.
But coming back to your contribution to aeronautics, you were probably the first people in the country, first scientist in the country who started working on non-linear aspect of design. And
Yes.
your contribution was recognized immediately,
Yes.
and your papers were cited all across the
Yes.
world. Would you like to say
I
something about
was
it?
I was fortunate that way. There are scientists whose work remain unknown for a very long time. This is known as the sleeping beauties in science. But I was fortunate in that sense. My work on nonlinear mechanics and then my work on what is called finite element techniques were recognized very quickly. And I won the Bhatnagar Prize at a
Just
fairly
one
young age.
clarification. Would you like to say something about non-linear and linear? What was this paradigm shift that was taking place in analysis, especially in
Well, the
mechanics?
universe to start with is actually nonlinear. But it's extremely difficult to handle the universe at nonlinear scales. So the earliest scientific investigations simplified the universe. And by and large, they are good to describe most things in the universe. And linear theories were used. In fact, the early ships and the early railway trains and the early bridges and so on were built on linear theories. But when you start pushing the frontiers, when you start building aeroplanes which are extremely light, you need aircraft skins which are a millimeter thick, then you find that you have to go into the nonlinear regime. And typically, nonlinear analysis will be 2 orders of magnitude more difficult. You have to put in 100 times the effort to get the answer for a nonlinear analysis. And that's where computers came to play a very important role.
And this is the period when you shifted from linear to non-linear analysis.
Yeah.
And this was the period
And
that it was happening all over the world.
it was happening all
And
over
we
the world.
were at the frontier of the
At
basic
that time,
knowledge.
yes. In fact, I find that something worrying nowadays. If I look at the period of the 70s to the 80s, India was a significant player in many of these areas, in computational mechanics and so on, but not anymore. Now you have countries like Singapore, Taiwan, China, and so on,
China.
far ahead of India in these areas. And we have not grown at the rate we should have.
And what could be the reason for that?
Reason to say was neglect, not just by the government, but by civil society at large, by the industrial sector and so on. Much more funding should have come in from the industrial sector. To my mind, the government did everything that could be done. If you look at very simple sums, the government funding has gone up to something like 60,000 crores a year now in R&D. And you can't expect the government to go push beyond
But at
that.
GDP level, it says remain static. In fact, it has gone down slightly.
Yeah, but that's because we expect the government to do all the funding, and that is not fair.
No, but in
Typically-
China, if you look at the GDP percentage, it has tripled in last 15 years.
You mean of the economy as a whole? But we are talking of
No,
the
I'm talking
expenditure
about
on R&D.
I'm talking about the R&D expenditure. It was about 0.5. Now it's 1.5 in China, and Chinese economy is much larger.
Much larger.
The money that is being pumped into R&D in China, especially in science, is much more than what we are
Much more
doing.
than in India. But in China, fortunately for them, the industrial sector plays a very huge role now. All the funding does not come entirely from the government. But in India, we still expect the government to do all the funding, which is not fair on the government. I would ideally like the industrial sector to spend about 4 times what the government is spending, which means that for the 60,000 crores that the government is spending now, the industrial sector should wake up and pump in about 240,000 crores. And I see no signs of that.
Industrial sector should wake up and pump in more money in R&D.
Much more money.
We'll continue the discussion. I have to take a small break. Don't go anywhere. We'll come back. Welcome back. Dr. Gangan Prathap, we were discussing that the government has done what it could do probably. In a poor country like ours, industrial sector, which has grown many folds after independence, has not taken up the challenge. It doesn't have probably confidence in the scientific community, in the community that has been doing research. What has been the cause of it?
See, if we knew the answer to that, then India would have been a great industrial power. I think the problem was that industry was always profit-driven. They had very short time spans that they looked ahead. They could not look far into the future and could never understand that innovation plays a very important role in the way your economy will grow much later in the future. Perhaps
So what you are saying is industry has not been far-sighted.
Enough.
Though our political and scientific leadership has been far-sighted, we've created great institutions which are doing excellent work.
At the time of independence, we had the vision, meaning the government had the vision. And as you rightly said, they built all these institutions. We had the CSIR, which continues to be the best agency for research in the country. We had the IITs, which were then, as of now, considered among the best technological institutes in the world. We had the ISRO, which is one of the best performing technological missions in the world. And they grew as they should up to about 1971. And then we see the watershed. At that time, it was the industrial sector which should have taken over the leadership. And that did not happen. And the burden of science and technology should have shifted from the government to the industrial sector. That was the point where India began to make these mistakes.
So we have not been able to instill the confidence that we should have been able to build among the private sector in the country.
Yeah, my argument is quite simple. For instance, that if you have 40 CSIR labs, then the industries should have 160 labs to match these 40. We don't have that. We don't even have a single one. And that becomes clear.
Will you say in clear terms that industry has been irresponsible in building the nation?
Oh, but it's a very strong word to use. I would rather say that industry has overlooked the need to do
They're more confident of going abroad and buying the technology, coming back, producing and making profits.
Whether they had technology or not, industry was focused mainly on the profit motive. That's the way I see it.
But that's the case all over the world. Industry is supposed to focus on profit.
No, I'm not very sure about that. There are industries which commit a large amount of their revenue and sales to R&D, much more than this 3% that we talk about as a portion of the
You
GDP.
shifted from aeronautics, which was frontier technology, frontier science, to scientometrics. How did that shift come about?
Yeah, I was interested in science policy. Then I was interested to see how science policy is based on metrics that you derive from what we now call big data. These are huge databases
Right.
involving nowadays something like 30 to 40 million documents and 15 million authors and so on. Then you find that there are very basic rules and paradigms that exist there, which are governed by the same principles of physics and thermodynamics and so on. So I started looking very deeply into that. And that was the kind of work that I did at NISCAIR when we got to know each other.
Correct.
And you find that the same techniques that are used in aeronautics are used in a whole lot of other modeling. And then again used in areas like scientometrics. And now you see very similar techniques being used in studying the social media.
Absolutely.
The same metrics are used for Google and Yahoo and so on. So there is this idea that's called consilience, where
So your love
many
for
disciplines
mathematics
took me
and
through all these.
statistics took to various vistas.
All these strands weave together and come and bring a single holistic picture.
You've got the best awards that one could think of. Which one excited you the most? Bhatnagar Award?
Probably that's still the best award in the country. So maybe that was the one that I looked forward to. And in fact, I made it a point that after the Bhatnagar Award, I will not go seeking awards. So you would see that my last award was the Bhatnagar Prize.
Right. After that, you didn't.
I did not go seeking any more awards. I concentrated on my work and my research.
You've published more than 200 papers in the best journals across the world, 300 articles and reports, etc. How did you manage to do so much work?
Well, I'm not.
Are you happy and satisfied?
I have not looked at it from that point of view. I'm happy and satisfied, yes. I've done what I could. I also have a lot of other interests. I do a lot of reading, particularly I read a lot of literature, a lot of history and so on. So I think I managed to strike a balance in my life.
And once you look back, you are happy and contented with whatever you have done?
Yes, absolutely.
Would you like to sign off by giving a message to the younger generation?
Perhaps the best message is the one that I gave my own son, as my father did to me. It is always look for the first principles. This is something that the Greeks taught us, that the universal laws are true all over the universe. Seek them out, and then you have a rational explanation for the world. So it's the search for first principles that kept me going. And
Wonderful.
That is what I would tell all young people. Doesn't matter where you work, in business or in law, or as a teacher or as a scientist. Search for the first principles.
May I, on your behalf, promise our viewers that if they have any question, comment or queries, you will be happy to answer?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for giving us so much of time.
You again.
Do write to us if you have any questions, comments or queries. Our email address is eurekarstv@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with another outstanding scientist. Till then, goodbye.